Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and don't forget to leave a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd share a story like this online. Most people who write these things on Reddit or YouTube comments are either exaggerating or just craving attention. At least, that's what I used to think. But after what happened to me in Florida a few summers ago, I can't keep this bottled up anymore. I need to put it somewhere, maybe to convince myself I'm not crazy, maybe to warn others who might end up in the same place. Even now, years later, the memories keep me awake at night, looping in my mind like an old VHS tape that never stops rewinding and replaying. It started when I was driving alone down Highway 27, cutting straight through the swampy parts of Central Florida. I had been on the road for almost 12 hours, trying to get from Tallahassee to Miami in one day. I was running on cheap gas station coffee and adrenaline. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees and the air got that heavy, humid feel that makes your shirt stick to your back, I knew I couldn't keep going. My eyes burned, my hands felt weak on the wheel, and every mile marker blurred into the next. I needed a place to crash. That's when I saw it. Through the trees, half hidden by vines and tall grass, a neon sign flickered. Lakeview Motel. Vacancy. It looked like something out of a 1970s postcard, the kind of roadside stop that should have been torn down decades ago. But exhaustion makes you ignore your instincts. I pulled in. The parking lot was cracked, weeds pushing through the concrete. A few old cars sat scattered around, covered in dust, like they hadn't moved in months. The office light glowed yellow behind grimy glass. Inside, the air smelled like old carpet and mildew. Behind the counter stood a man who looked like he had been rooted there for decades. He wore a white button-up shirt, yellowed at the collar, and his smile was too wide, too forced, as if he had practiced it in the mirror until it stuck that way. "You're lucky," he said, sliding a metal key across the counter. "Only one room left tonight. Room 6. Best view of the lake." I glanced toward the window behind him. Beyond the dark line of trees, I could just barely see a patch of black water reflecting the moonlight. For some reason, that lake gave me a chill. Still, I didn't argue. I just wanted a bed. Room 6 was at the far end of the row. The door creaked when I unlocked it. Inside, the smell hit me first. Stale cigarettes mixed with something sour, like wet towels left too long. The carpet was stained, the wallpaper peeling in strips. The bedspread was patterned with faded flowers, and for a second, I thought I saw it move, like something crawling beneath it. But when I yanked it back, it was just shadows. I should have left then. Any sane person would have. But the weight in my body was stronger than the dread in my chest. I lay down, fully clothed, and closed my eyes. That's when the noises began. At first it was subtle, a soft drip 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 as though water was leaking from the ceiling. Then I heard footsteps above me, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth. I frowned. The motel had only one level. There couldn't be anyone upstairs. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the footsteps grew louder, circling, stopping right above where I lay. Then came the whisper. It was faint at first, like wind slipping through cracks in the wall, but soon it grew clearer, right next to my ear, though no one was there. "Don't look at the lake." I shot up, heart pounding. The room was empty, the door still locked. I told myself I was dreaming, half asleep, caught in that in-between state. But when I lay back down, the whisper came again, stronger this time, urgent. "Don't look at the lake." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair by the window, staring at the cracked blinds, waiting for morning. At some point, I heard splashing outside as if something large was moving in the water. I tried not to look. I remembered the voice. But my curiosity gnawed at me until, just before dawn, I peeked through the blinds. What I saw made my blood run cold. Out by the lake, figures stood in the fog. Dozens of them, maybe more. They were pale, almost glowing in the gray morning light. Some were children, some adults, all standing perfectly still, facing the water. None of them moved, not even when the wind blew. And then, as if they knew I was watching, they all turned their heads toward me at once. I stumbled back, knocking the chair over. When I looked again, the figures were gone. At sunrise, I went straight to the office, key in hand, ready to demand answers. The clerk was there, same frozen smile, as though he hadn't moved all night. "How was your stay?" he asked. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Who are the people by the lake?" For the first time, his smile faltered. His eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. He lowered his voice. "You weren't supposed to see them." I didn't wait for more. I tossed the key on the counter and walked out fast, almost running to my car. As I pulled onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The motel was gone. I swear to God, where it had stood just hours before, there was nothing but swamp and trees. No building, no sign, not even a patch of cleared ground. Just endless Florida wilderness. For months after, I told myself I had dreamed it, that exhaustion and highway hypnosis had tricked me. But then, about 6 months later, a friend sent me an article from a local Florida paper. It was about a motel fire on Highway 27 in the early 1980s. The Lakeview Motel had burned to the ground, killing everyone inside, guests and staff. Witnesses claimed the fire started near the lake, though no cause was ever found. Locals said the spirits of the dead still lingered, trapped between the water and the ruins. The article included a photo of the victims. My stomach turned to ice when I saw the clerk's face among them, his smile just as wide as the night I checked in. And at the bottom of the article, a final detail chilled me more than anything else. One of the last things survivors had reported before the fire consumed the building was a strange voice whispering through the halls. "Don't look at the lake." I've lived in Florida all my life, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the swamp doesn't forgive curiosity. The Everglades are more than just a stretch of wetlands. They're a maze of secrets, half buried in mud and tangled in mangroves. People think it's just gators and mosquitoes out there, but old Floridians know better. There are places you don't go, even in daylight. Places where the air feels heavier, where even the animals fall silent. My story begins in the summer of 2016, when I was fresh out of college and desperate for adventure. I'd always been drawn to urban exploration, sneaking into abandoned malls, shuttered motels, half-built condos that the 2008 crash had left to rot. So when a buddy of mine, let's call him Eric, told me he had found an old house deep in the Everglades, a place with no record online, no property listing, nothing, I was hooked. "It's like it doesn't exist," Eric said, showing me blurry photos on his phone. The house was 2 stories tall, old wood siding painted white but rotting to gray. The windows were black holes, no glass, no curtains. The strangest thing was its location, smack in the middle of dense swamp, no driveway, no trail, nothing but water and mud. "How'd you even get there?" I asked. "Boat," he grinned. "Come with me this weekend, you'll see." I should have said no. I should have remembered all the warnings my grandfather used to give me about the Everglades, that the swamp hides things better left alone. But back then, I was reckless, hungry for stories, for photos, for anything that made me feel alive. We set out on Saturday morning in Eric's old aluminum John boat. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes your clothes cling to you within minutes. We pushed through narrow waterways, past sawgrass taller than our heads. Dragonflies skimmed the water's surface, and somewhere in the distance an alligator bellowed. After almost an hour of winding turns, the swamp opened into a clearing, and there it was. The house stood on a small patch of dry land, its foundation sinking into the muck. Cypress knees jutted up around it like crooked teeth. The roof sagged, shingles missing. Spanish moss draped over the porch like a funeral veil. It looked ancient, older than any house had a right to be in a place like this. Eric tied up the boat, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Come on, man, let's see what's inside." The front door hung half open, creaking when we pushed it. Inside, The air was stale and damp, heavy with the smell of mold. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light cutting through the broken windows. The wallpaper was peeling, the furniture covered in white sheets that had yellowed with age. "Feels like they just left," Eric said, pulling a sheet off a couch. A cloud of dust rose, making us cough. We split up, exploring room by room. I wandered into the kitchen. Rusted pots still hung on the wall. A cracked plate sat on the counter, as if someone had set it down mid-meal and never returned. When I opened a cabinet, I found canned food, labels faded but intact. I don't know why, but something about that unsettled me more than the empty rooms. Upstairs, I found a hallway lined with doors. Most were bedrooms, each one stranger than the last. One room was filled with dolls, dozens of them, sitting on shelves, their glass eyes staring blankly. Another room had its walls covered in children's drawings, stick figures with wide black circles for eyes. The last room at the end of the hall had a door that was locked. Eric joined me, and together we forced it open. Inside was a study, or maybe an office. The floor was littered with papers, so many that we couldn't even see the wood beneath. In the center stood a desk with a single object on it, a mirror. Not a big one, just a handheld vanity mirror with an ornate brass frame. The glass was flawless, not a speck of dust, not a single crack, as if it had been placed there yesterday. When I picked it up, something strange happened. For a second, my reflection wasn't mine. It was me, but not me. My face was thinner, my eyes darker, hollow. My mouth hung open in a silent scream. I dropped the mirror, and it clattered to the floor unbroken. "Dude, what the hell?" Eric said, picking it up. He looked into it and frowned. "Looks normal to me." I wanted to leave right then, but Eric was thrilled. He started gathering papers, snapping photos, acting like he had discovered a gold mine. I lingered by the door, uneasy, the hairs on my neck standing up. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps upstairs, above us. But we were upstairs. I froze. Eric heard it too. His grin faded. Slowly we turned toward the hall. The sound grew louder, closer, until it stopped just outside the study door. And then the door slammed shut. We were plunged into darkness. Eric cursed, fumbling with his phone flashlight. When the beam clicked on, the papers on the floor were gone. The desk was gone. The mirror was gone. The room was empty. That's when I noticed something worse. The door wasn't just shut. It was gone. Where it had been, there was now solid wall. We pounded, screamed, clawed at the wood, but nothing budged. My chest tightened, panic rising. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe. Shadows shifted across the walls, moving even when Eric's flashlight was still. And then, in the corner, something began to take shape. It was a figure, tall and thin, its body made of darkness itself. Its head tilted unnaturally, like a bird studying prey. I could feel its eyes on me, though there was nothing in its face but emptiness. It raised one long finger and pointed at me. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on the porch, gasping for air. The sun was setting, the swamp buzzing with cicadas. Eric sat beside me, pale and trembling. Neither of us remembered how we got out of that room. Neither of us spoke the entire boat ride back. That night I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw that mirror, my reflection screaming silently. 2 days later, Eric stopped answering my calls. When I went to his apartment, the door was unlocked, the place ransacked. His phone sat on the table, flashlight still on, battery dead. He was never seen again. I told the police everything, but they didn't believe me. They searched the swamp, but they said there was no house there. No clearing, no dry land, nothing but endless water and reeds. For years, I tried to convince myself it was a shared hallucination, until last month. I was driving through a small town on the edge of the Everglades, and I stopped at a thrift store. On a shelf by the register, something caught my eye. It was a brass-framed mirror, handheld, flawless glass, When I picked it up, my reflection wasn't mine. It was Eric. And this time, he wasn't screaming. He was smiling. There's a stretch of road on Florida's Atlantic coast that locals swear is cursed. A1A runs along the ocean, weaving between palm trees, beachfront condos, and sleepy little towns that seem stuck in the 1980s. Tourists love it for the views, but ask anyone who grew up around there and they'll warn you not to drive it alone at night. I didn't believe the stories until one night in 2019 when I was heading home from a late shift in Daytona. The air was thick with salt and humidity, my windows down as the sound of waves echoed faintly from the dark shore. The road was nearly empty, just me and the occasional truck rumbling past. I had an hour's drive ahead of me and I was already exhausted. That's when I saw her. She stood on the shoulder, illuminated by my headlights. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, wearing a white sundress that looked almost glowing in the dark. Her long hair clung damply to her shoulders, and she held her arms crossed tight against the wind. She didn't wave, didn't signal. She just stood there, staring down the road as if waiting for someone. I slowed instinctively, rolling down my window. "You need a ride?" I called. She turned to me then, and for a moment I thought she was smiling, but her face looked pale, washed out, her eyes reflecting the headlights in a way that made them seem almost silver. "Yes," she said softly. "South. Please." I don't know why I didn't question it. Maybe it was the late hour, maybe the way her voice carried in the night air. I unlocked the passenger door, and she slid in without another word. The scent of seawater followed her, sharp and briny, like she'd just stepped out of the ocean. We drove in silence for a while. She stared out the window, her reflection faint against the glass, though every time I glanced, her features looked different. Sharper, older, then younger again, like shifting through faces. I told myself it was just the play of the passing streetlights. After about 10 minutes, I tried to break the silence. "So, where exactly are you headed?" She didn't answer right away. Then, still staring at the water, she whispered, "Home." Something in her tone made the hairs on my arms rise. It wasn't the word itself, but the way she said it, like home wasn't a place, but something deeper, something final. Another few minutes passed before she finally spoke again, more clearly this time. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I laughed nervously. "Not really. Why? You gonna tell me this road is haunted?" She turned her head slowly and looked at me. Her eyes caught the dashboard light, and I saw they weren't silver at all. They were black. Completely, utterly black. "Yes," she said. "This road belongs to us." I slammed the brakes without thinking, the car skidding slightly on the asphalt. My heart thundered in my chest. But when I looked at the passenger seat, it was empty. The smell of seawater lingered. The fabric of the seat was wet. I sat there for what felt like forever, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Finally, I pulled back onto the road, driving faster now, desperate to get home. But less than a mile later, my headlights caught movement again. She was standing on the shoulder. Same dress, same damp hair, same pale face. My blood went cold. I didn't stop this time. I pressed the gas harder, flying past her. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw her standing in the middle of the road, watching me go. That should have been the end of it. I should have gone home, locked my doors, and never spoken of it again. But curiosity is a poison. A few days later, I started asking around, co-workers, friends, even strangers in bars. Most people laughed it off, but one older guy at a bait shop leaned in close when I mentioned it. "You saw her," he whispered. "The girl from Ormond Beach. She's been out there for decades." According to him, in the early 1970s, a young woman drowned after her car skidded off A1A and into the ocean during a storm. Locals said her spirit still lingered, hitchhiking southbound, trying to find her way home. Anyone foolish enough to stop and pick her up would vanish within a year, dragged into the water the way she was. I laughed it off at first, but then I remembered the wet seat, the smell of seawater that clung to my clothes long after I showered, and then the dreams began. Every night, I'd dream of driving that road, the same endless stretch of highway, the moon over the water, the crash of waves in the dark. And every night she was there, sometimes in the passenger seat, sometimes in the middle of the road, sometimes standing just outside my window, her black eyes staring in. Last week, the dreams got worse. I woke up coughing, my lungs burning, my sheets soaked through. The smell of salt water filled my room. My shoes by the door were wet as though I'd walked straight into the ocean. And 2 nights ago, I woke to find footprints on my floor, bare, damp, leading from the bedroom door to the side of my bed. I don't know how much longer I have. The old man at the bait shop told me her victims never make it a full year. It's been 11 months since I picked her up. Every night now I hear waves crashing outside my window, though I live miles from the beach. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear her voice, soft and close to my ear. South, please. When I was a kid growing up in Central Florida, my grandfather used to warn me about the land our town was built on. Not the usual old man stories about gators or sinkholes, but something darker. He'd sit on the porch at dusk, sipping his sweet tea and say, "Never trust an orange grove that's too quiet at night. Means it's growing on the wrong kind of bones." I thought he was just telling tall tales. Florida has always had ghost stories tied to its swamps and groves, whispers about Seminole burial grounds or settlers who vanished into the wetlands. But when I was older, when I finally saw what lay under one particular grove just outside of Claremont, I realized he hadn't been joking. He had been warning me. The story starts in 2014, when my friend Jonah bought a piece of cheap land off Highway 50. It was 10 acres of overgrown orange trees, tangled with vines and thick brush. He dreamed of clearing it, planting new trees and starting a small citrus business. Everyone told him he'd wasted his money. Florida's orange industry was dying from disease and imports. But Jonah didn't care. He was stubborn, the kind of guy who believed hard work could force the world into shape. He asked me to help him clear the place. I needed the cash, so I agreed. At first, it was just grueling labor. Chainsaws, machetes, sweat running down our backs under the brutal Florida sun. But after a few days, we started noticing things. The grove was too quiet. No birds in the trees, no insects buzzing, no distant calls of frogs from the swamp. Just silence, heavy and wrong. And then there were the holes. Dozens of shallow depressions scattered across the grove like old graves. Some were no more than dips in the soil, others so deep our boots sank when we stepped too close. Jonah joked about it at first, calling it the Grove of 1,000 Graves. But the longer we worked, the less he laughed. One afternoon, while pulling up a tangle of roots, Jonah's shovel hit something solid. At first, we thought it was just limestone, but when we cleared the dirt away, we saw the edge of a wooden plank, rotten, soft to the touch. Jonah dug more, and soon we uncovered what looked like the corner of a coffin. He froze. I froze. Neither of us said the word out loud, but we both knew. We should have stopped right then, called the sheriff something. But Jonah's pride got in the way. "Probably just an old settler," he muttered, shoving the dirt back in. People buried folks anywhere back then. He refused to admit his precious land might be worthless, cursed, unsellable. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing that broken coffin in the dirt, wondering how many more were beneath the trees. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Jonah. "You hear that?" he whispered. His voice was trembling. I listened. At first nothing. Then faintly through the static I heard it. Knocking. Slow, rhythmic, hollow. "Coming from the grove," Jonah said. "Been going on for an hour." I told him to get out, to go back inside, but before I could say more, the line went dead. The next morning I drove out to his place. His truck was in the driveway, but the house was empty. I found him outside, standing at the edge of the grove, staring at the trees. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking. "They're under there," he said hoarsely. "All of them. I heard them all night." I tried to reason with him, told him he needed sleep, that it was just animals or his imagination, but he wouldn't listen. He grabbed a shovel and marched back into the grove. Reluctantly, I followed. We dug where the knocking seemed loudest, the ground unusually soft. Within minutes, we uncovered another coffin, older than the first, wood splintering at the touch. Jonah pried it open with the shovel and the stench hit us like a wall. Inside was a skeleton, its bones tangled with roots that seemed to grow straight through the ribcage, anchoring it to the earth. But worse than that were the claw marks. The inside of the coffin lid was shredded, gouged by desperate fingernails. Jonah staggered back, gagging. "They weren't dead," he whispered. "They were buried alive." Before I could respond, the ground beneath us shifted. It was subtle at first, like the earth breathing. Then it gave way. I fell hard, dirt collapsing around me, tumbling into darkness. When I landed, the impact knocked the breath out of my chest. My flashlight skittered across the ground, flickering. I was in a cavern. Or maybe not a cavern, a crypt. Rows of coffins stretched into the shadows, stacked haphazardly, some open, some broken, bones spilling out. The walls were damp, roots dangling like ropes. The air was thick, suffocating, filled with the faint sound of scratching. And then I realized it wasn't faint. It was everywhere. From every coffin, every shadowed corner, came the sound of fingernails clawing wood. Dozens, hundreds of frantic scratches all around me. I screamed for Jonah, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. My flashlight flickered, and in that moment of dim light, I saw them. Figures crawling out of the coffins. Not skeletons, not corpses. Something in between. Their skin was gray, stretched tight over bone, their eyes milky and blind, their mouths opening in silent screams. Hands reached for me, cold and damp, pulling at my legs. I scrambled, clawing at the dirt walls, desperate to climb out. Just as one hand closed around my ankle, yanking me down, Jonah's shovel appeared above, his arm reaching. I don't remember how he pulled me out. I just remember running, both of us stumbling through the grove, not stopping until we reached the house. We left that night, drove until sunrise, neither of us speaking. Jonah never went back to his land. He sold it cheap a year later, claiming crop disease had ruined it. But here's the part I can't shake. Last month, out of morbid curiosity, I looked up old records at the county office. I found a single mention of that property, an old pauper's cemetery from the 1800s, unmarked, forgotten when the grove was planted. Hundreds of bodies dumped there, many of them yellow fever victims. But the records had a chilling note in the margins, written in faded ink. Buried alive, suspected, premature. And now, some nights I wake to a sound outside my window, soft, rhythmic, knocking. I grew up in Florida, not far from Orlando, where tourists flood in for Mickey Mouse and roller coasters. But beyond the polished streets and flashing lights, there are places no guidebook will ever show you. One of those places is an abandoned theme park that few locals even talk about. It was supposed to rival Disney in the late 80s, but it went bankrupt before it could open to the public. The land was fenced off, swallowed slowly by the swamp and the creeping vines. My friends and I heard rumors about it for years. Kids disappearing, workers dying in accidents, rides that somehow ran on their own at night. Of course, when we were teenagers, those rumors sounded more like an invitation than a warning. One summer night when I was 17, me and 3 friends, Evan, Marcus, and Kayla, decided to sneak in. It wasn't hard. The chain-link fence was rusted, parts of it bent low enough to crawl under. The air inside felt different, heavier, like stepping into a world forgotten by time. Vines strangled old ticket booths, shattered glass crunched under our sneakers, and the faint smell of mold and stagnant water clung to everything. We carried flashlights, but even their beams seemed swallowed by the darkness. The first thing we found was the carousel. Its painted horses were cracked and peeling, their glass eyes missing, their wooden mouths frozen in eternal screams. The whole structure leaned slightly to one side, but when Marcus brushed against it, the thing groaned and shifted, spinning a few inches on its own as though it remembered the rhythm of a song long gone. We laughed nervously, pretending it was nothing, but none of us touched it again. We wandered deeper into the park, past food stalls where rusted fryers sat like tombs and soda machines stood empty, their fronts smashed open. The deeper we went, the louder the cicadas seemed to get, until it felt like a chorus drowning out our thoughts. That's when Evan froze, pointing toward the roller coaster track looming ahead. We could see the silhouette of the cars at the very top, like they had been left mid-climb decades ago. But as we watched, the cars shifted. Not much, just a twitch forward, like something invisible had nudged them. Marcus swore and said it was probably the wind. But Kayla grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. At first I thought she meant the cicadas, but then I heard it too. Laughter. Faint, like children giggling far away. Except it wasn't far away. It seemed to circle us, bouncing between the broken rides and empty stalls. We spun our flashlights around, but the beams caught only shadows that seemed to move a second too late, like they weren't shadows at all. We should have left then, but teenage curiosity can be stronger than fear. So we pressed on, finally reaching what looked like the park's main attraction, a massive fun house shaped like a grinning clown's head. Its teeth were chipped and yellowed, vines crawling out of its eyes like tears. I hated clowns even then, and every instinct screamed not to go inside. But Marcus, ever the daredevil, pushed the door open and stepped in. The smell hit us instantly, rot, mildew, and something sharp and metallic like old blood. The halls inside were lined with cracked mirrors, most too dirty to reflect much. But as we moved deeper, I noticed something strange. My reflection wasn't following me exactly. When I turned, it turned late. When I blinked, it kept staring. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, until Kayla suddenly screamed. She had shined her light into a mirror, and instead of her reflection, there was a man. He stood behind her, grinning wide, his skin pale and rubbery like a mask, his eyes too dark, like holes burned into his face. We whipped around, but no one was there. Evan grabbed her hand and shouted that we needed to leave, but when we turned back, the hallway behind us had changed. The entrance was gone. The mirrors now stretched endlessly, each one reflecting not us, but different scenes. Children sitting lifeless on carousel horses, workers hanging from roller coaster beams, families trapped on Ferris wheels that spun into the sky. It felt like we had walked into another world, one the park itself had created to trap us. We ran, our footsteps echoing in ways that didn't match the rhythm of our steps. Sometimes, I heard extra footsteps behind us, faster, heavier. At one point, Marcus stopped to catch his breath, but before we could grab him, the floor beneath him gave way. He fell screaming into blackness and we never heard him land. We screamed his name until our throats burned, but the park didn't give him back. When we finally burst out of the funhouse, the night air hit us like a punch. But the park was different now. The rides weren't silent. The carousel spun slowly, its horses moving up and down. The roller coaster creaked as the cars inched higher, then crashed down in a deafening roar that shook the ground. Lights flickered on across the park, but the bulbs glowed a sickly yellow, revealing shapes standing in the distance. Dozens of them. Some looked like children, some like workers in uniforms, some just shadows shaped like people. All of them were watching us. We didn't think. We just ran. Through the food stalls, past the broken ticket booths, until we reached the fence. Evan and Kayla scrambled under first. As I crawled through, I heard something. Marcus's voice, faint but clear, calling my name from deep inside the park. I froze, my heart tearing in two. But when I looked back, I saw him standing by the clown funhouse waving at me. Only, it wasn't Marcus. His body was too thin, His smile stretched too wide, his eyes hollow. Kayla yanked me through the fence, screaming at me not to look back. We ran until we reached the car, until the lights of Orlando swallowed the darkness behind us. None of us spoke for days after that. Evan refused to even talk about it, and Kayla had nightmares so bad she moved out of state the following year. As for me, I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that we imagined the voices, the shadows, Marcus's fall. But then a few weeks later, I drove past the fence again. There, hanging on the chain link like it had been nailed in place, was Marcus's backpack. Torn, dirty, but undeniably his. The police said it was just kids messing around, but I know better. That park doesn't let people go. Not really. And sometimes late at night, when the air is heavy and the cicadas fall silent, I swear I can still hear the faint echo of carnival music drifting through the Florida swamp. When I was a kid, my family rented a house for a summer near the edge of the Everglades. My father thought it would be a cheap way to get out of the city, some peace and quiet by the water. The house itself was old, a 2-story wooden structure that sagged at the corners as though it had been standing too long against the swamp's damp air. The boards creaked with every step, and the walls smelled faintly of mildew no matter how many windows we opened. But the strangest thing about the house was its silence. The Everglades are never quiet. There's always something chirping, buzzing, or croaking. Yet, around that house, it was dead still. No frogs, no crickets, no birds. Just silence and the low hum of the swamp that seemed to breathe all on its own. I was maybe 12 at the time, curious and restless. The swamp fascinated me, though my mother warned me not to wander too far. "People get lost out there," she said, her face unusually serious. "And not everyone comes back." She wasn't just worried about gators or snakes. There was something in her voice that hinted at something deeper, something unspoken. I brushed it off as paranoia, the way kids do, but I couldn't shake the way her eyes lingered on the swamp like she was afraid it might look back at her. The first few nights passed uneventfully. My father sat on the porch drinking beer. My mother read in the living room, and I played with my flashlight under the covers. But then, on the 4th night, I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was my father moving around downstairs, but when I listened closer, I realized it was a tapping, steady, deliberate, against my bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, pulling the sheets tighter around me. The window looked out onto the swamp, nothing but darkness beyond the glass. Slowly, I sat up, heart pounding, and turned my flashlight toward it. For a second, I saw nothing, just the reflection of my pale face staring back. But then, as the beam caught the glass, I saw fingers. Long, pale fingers pressed against the window pane, tapping lightly, almost playfully. They weren't my father's hands or anyone's I knew. They were too thin, the nails too sharp, almost claw-like. I gasped, and just like that, the fingers slipped out of sight, leaving only fog on the glass, like breath from the other side. The next morning, I told my parents. My father laughed it off, saying it was probably a tree branch, but there were no trees near that window. My mother didn't laugh. She just went quiet, her lips pressed tight, and I noticed she started locking every door and window in the house after that. But locking the windows didn't stop the tapping. It came back the next night, louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. I buried my head under the pillow until sleep finally took me, but by then, I could swear I heard a voice whispering my name through the glass. The following night, it was worse. I woke up not to tapping, but to scratching. Nails dragging slowly across the wood of the house, circling, like something was testing the walls, looking for a way in. On the 6th night, I woke to silence again. Too much silence. Not even the wind moved through the swamp. I lay still, listening, when suddenly the silence broke with the groan of the front door opening downstairs. I sat up, frozen, straining to hear. Footsteps creaked slowly across the wooden floorboards, one by one, heading toward the stairs. I wanted to scream for my parents, but my throat locked up, dry and useless. I just listened as the footsteps climbed, closer and closer, until they reached the hallway outside my room. The doorknob turned. Just slightly. Enough to rattle, but not enough to open. I couldn't breathe. And then, silence again. Whoever, whatever it was, just stood there on the other side of the door. I finally forced my body to move, diving under the covers, clutching my flashlight like a weapon. When morning came, the door was still locked. My parents swore they hadn't heard a thing. The days became unbearable. My father insisted everything was fine, but even he started looking uneasy, drinking more, staring out into the swamp for hours like he expected something to rise from the water. My mother hardly spoke at all, just clutched her rosary and muttered prayers under her breath. And me? I couldn't sleep, waiting every night for the tapping, the scratching, the footsteps. It all came to a breaking point on the 10th night. I woke not to tapping or scratching, but to the sound of the window sliding open. I shot upright in bed, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and pointed it at the window. The glass was gone, completely removed like it had never been there. And inside the frame, crawling into my room, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that bent wrong, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Its skin was the same pale color as the fingers I'd seen before, stretched tight over bones that looked too sharp, too jagged to be human. Its face, or what should have been its face, was nothing but a smooth surface, blank and featureless. Yet somehow, I knew it was looking at me. I screamed, finally, loud enough to wake the whole house. My father burst into the room, wielding a baseball bat, but by the time he got there, the thing was gone. The window was intact, glass perfectly in place, as though it had never been touched. We left the house the very next morning. My father refused to talk about what he saw or didn't see, but he didn't argue with my mother when she demanded we never go back. Years later, when I was older, I looked up the history of that property. Turns out, the house had been built in the 1920s and abandoned for decades before the landlord started renting it again in the 90s. The original owners? A family of 4 who disappeared without a trace. Neighbors claimed they saw them wandering into the swamp one night and never returning. Some said they heard tapping on their windows too, right before the family vanished. I don't know what it was that stalked us in that house, but sometimes, when the night is still and heavy, I hear it again in my head, tap, tap, tap. And deep down I know, whatever lives in the Everglades isn't just watching from the water. Sometimes it comes to the windows. Sometimes it waits at the door. When I first moved to Tallahassee for college, I thought the scariest thing I'd have to deal with was finals week. But I was wrong. The real terror came one night, when a group of friends convinced me to explore an old abandoned asylum just outside the city limits. It wasn't marked on most maps anymore, just a husk of concrete buildings hidden behind overgrown trees and rusted fences. Officially, it had closed down decades ago, after reports of patient mistreatment and mysterious deaths. Unofficially, everyone in town had a story about it. The screams people claimed to hear at night, the shadows seen moving behind its broken windows, the disappearances of curious teens who went in and never came back. The night we went, the air was thick and damp, heavy with the smell of rain-soaked earth. Our group was small, me, my roommate Tyler, and 2 girls from our dorm, Melissa and Janelle. We brought flashlights, a couple of beers, and the cocky bravado of kids who thought ghost stories were just that, stories. The fence was easy to slip through, bent down by years of trespassers, and within minutes we were inside the courtyard. The asylum loomed in front of us like a monument to everything forgotten, tall, gray, and lifeless, with its windows gaping open like black mouths. Inside, the air was cooler, almost too cold, as if the walls themselves were sucking the warmth out of us. Our flashlights cut across peeling paint, graffiti scrawled in angry red letters, and broken furniture scattered across the halls. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. The sound of our footsteps echoed unnaturally, almost as though the building was listening. We found old patient rooms, each one worse than the last. Rusted bed frames bolted to the floor, leather straps dangling from them like forgotten restraints. The stench of mildew and something metallic lingered in the air. In one room, Melissa swore she saw someone sitting in the corner, but when we swung our lights around, it was just a pile of blankets. She laughed it off, but her hand shook when she tried to relight her cigarette. Then we found the stairwell. It spiraled down into the basement, and though every bone in my body told me not to go, Tyler insisted. "That's where the real shit happens," he said, his grin too wide. None of us wanted to look like cowards, so we followed. The basement was different. The moment we stepped off the stairs, our flashlights flickered, dimming like their batteries were dying all at once. The floor was damp, puddles of stagnant water reflecting fractured light. Pipes groaned above us, and somewhere far off, a door slammed on its own. We walked slowly, passing old therapy rooms with smashed mirrors and rusting cabinets filled with yellowed papers that crumbled at our touch. It was in one of those rooms that we found the chair. It sat in the center, bolted to the floor, leather straps hanging loose, a cracked metal helmet connected to wires dangling from the ceiling. "Electroshock therapy," Tyler muttered, whistling low. But it wasn't just the chair. On the walls surrounding it, scratched deep into the concrete, were words repeated over and over. "Let me out." The girls wanted to leave then, and so did I, but Tyler was stubborn. He sat down in the chair, pretending to struggle against the straps. "Come on," he laughed. "Say cheese." He pulled out his phone to take a selfie, but before he could snap it, the lights in the room flickered violently. For a split second, I swear I saw someone standing behind him. A tall figure in a hospital gown, face obscured by shadows, hands resting on Tyler's shoulders like it was proud of him. Then the light steadied and it was gone. We screamed at Tyler to get up, and he did, though he looked pale, shaken. "Okay," he said, his voice tight. "Let's get out of here." But when we turned back to the hall, the way we came, it wasn't there. The hallway had shifted. Instead of a staircase, there was just more corridor stretching into darkness. Panic set in. We ran blindly, our flashlights swinging, our breaths ragged. Every hallway looked the same: peeling paint, broken doors, endless shadows. Worse, the deeper we went, the more we heard. Whispers, faint at first, then louder, overlapping voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Some begged for help, others laughed. A low, guttural sound that didn't feel human. At one point, Janelle screamed. She had fallen behind, her flashlight beam cutting wildly through the dark. We turned just in time to see her being pulled into one of the rooms, her nails clawing at the frame as something yanked her into the shadows. Her screams echoed, then cut off all at once. When we ran inside, the room was empty. Not even footprints in the dust. We didn't speak after that. We just ran. Somehow we finally stumbled onto the stairwell again, bursting up the steps and out into the night air like drowning swimmers breaking the surface. But when we reached the fence, only 3 of us were left. Janelle was gone. Tyler wouldn't stop shaking, Melissa wouldn't stop crying, and I couldn't stop looking back at the asylum. Because in one of the top floor windows, a figure stood watching us. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a hospital gown, its hand pressed to the glass. And even from that distance, I swear I could see the words scratched into the pane. "Let me out." We told the police the next morning, but they found nothing. No sign of Janelle, no footprints, no recent activity, nothing. They said she probably ran away. But I know what I saw. I know what took her. And sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I see her face reflected in the dark, mouth open in a scream that never ends. The worst part? A week later, I got a photo sent to my phone from an unknown number. It was grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. It was Janelle, strapped to the chair in that basement, eyes wide, mouth sewn shut. There's a lighthouse in St. Augustine that most tourists pass by without a second glance. Built in the early 1800s, it's tall, whitewashed, perched on a jagged cliff overlooking the Atlantic. The town calls it historic, picturesque, a piece of living history. But locals have whispered for decades about the last keeper, a man named Elias Crow, who vanished one stormy night in 1927. They say his spirit still haunts the lighthouse, waiting for someone to come close enough to witness the truth. I first heard the story when I was working as a summer intern at a local history museum. The old curator, a frail woman with eyes like ice, pulled me aside one evening. "Don't go near the lighthouse after dark," she warned, her voice low and urgent. "Not alone. Not if you want to sleep at night. Some stories. They aren't meant for the living." I laughed it off, a nervous chuckle, because of course I had to see it for myself. Curiosity always wins, right? The first night I went, I parked my car at the base and walked up the winding path to the lighthouse. The moon was full, clouds scudding across it, casting long, flickering shadows over the jagged rocks. The wind was cold, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed, and for the first few minutes I thought it was just a quiet night by the water. But as I drew closer, I noticed something odd. The windows of the lighthouse glowed faintly, an amber light flickering like a candle, though it had been decommissioned decades ago. I hesitated, flashlight in hand, peering through the rusted gate. That's when I heard it. A soft humming. Not music exactly, but a tone, low and monotone, like someone singing numbers under their breath. Hesitant, I climbed the outer steps to the lighthouse door. The humming stopped as soon as I reached the threshold. I pushed the door, and it creaked open, revealing darkness inside, thick and almost tactile, like a fog that swallowed light. The staircase spiraled upward, each step groaning under my weight. I followed the narrow stone corridor, flashlight beam bouncing off the walls, revealing peeling paint, rusted railings, and strange stains that darkened the stone. Higher and higher I went, the wind howling outside, the ocean waves crashing against the cliff in long, thunderous roars. And then I saw him. Elias Crow, or at least his shadow, standing at the top of the staircase. His face was pale, almost chalky, eyes deep hollows that reflected the flashlight like twin moons. He wore the keeper's uniform, faded and moth-eaten, and clutched a lantern in one skeletal hand. But it wasn't the appearance that froze me. It was the movement. He didn't walk down the stairs. He didn't come toward me. He emerged from the walls like the stone itself had birthed him. I froze, every instinct screaming to run, but my legs refused to move. Crow raised his lantern slowly. The light flickered and revealed something behind him. Dozens of shadowy figures pressed into the walls themselves, faces contorted in silent screams, bodies twisted as if trapped mid-motion. And as I watched, I realized they weren't just shadows. They were the people who had vanished from St. Augustine over the last century, all those tourists, fishermen, and townsfolk never found. And now, they were part of the lighthouse, bound to the keeper. "Why are you here?" a voice rasped, as hollow as dry leaves. It was Crow, speaking without moving his lips. "This is no place for the living." I stumbled backward, heart-pounding, tripping over the stone steps. My flashlight skittered across the floor, and for a moment, everything went black. When the light returned, Crow was closer, the walls behind him writhing with faces and hands pushing outward as if trying to escape. I turned to run, but the staircase had vanished. There was only the top floor, open to the cliffside, the waves screaming below. The wind picked up, howling like the voices of those trapped souls. Crow's lantern floated toward me, illuminating my face, and I swear I saw something in my own reflection in its glass. A shadow stretching behind me, reaching for my throat. I screamed and lunged forward, and the next moment I was outside, the cliff empty and silent, the lighthouse dark as if nothing had happened. I drove home shaking, my hands tight on the wheel, but the nightmares didn't stop. Every night I hear the lantern swinging in the dark, the humming of numbers, the low whispers of trapped souls. Sometimes I wake to find my own shadow in impossible positions, reaching, waiting. Last week I went back to St. Augustine to take pictures for work. I parked near the lighthouse at dusk, trying to rationalize my fear, and there at the top window a lantern flickered again. The wind carried a soft humming, counting. 1, 2, 3. I didn't stay to hear more. But here's the thing I can't escape. That night, when I returned to my hotel, I checked my photos. In one picture, taken before I even realized it, there was a figure at the base of my bed, pale, uniformed, holding a lantern, crow, smiling at the camera. And behind him, pressed against the walls, dozens of faces staring straight at me.